Welcome to traumaticbraininjury.com, the leading source for information on the web regarding resources for traumatic brain injury for survivors and families. My name is Stuart Cohen. Today's guest is Joanne Finnegan. Joanne is the Chief Executive Officer of ReMed Recovery Care Centers, and over the last 20 years, ReMed is one of the leading post-acute neurorehabilitation centers in the United States. Joanne Finnegan is a certified therapeutic recreational specialist by training and education. She is also the chairperson of the Board of Trustees of CARF, that's C-A-R-F, which is the Commission on the Accreditation of Rehab Facilities. CARF is the leading accreditation organization for rehabilitation services in the United States. Joanne Finnegan, Chief Executive Officer of ReMed. Welcome to traumaticbraininjury.com.
Thank you, Stuart.
I want to ask you some questions here today about funding for brain injury treatment. Now, before we dive into this area, I understand that every situation is different, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Folks have different types of insurance coverage. Injuries happen on the job, off the job. Some people have no health insurance at all in today's world. And so with that as a background, I understand I'm going to be asking you some difficult questions, but I think it's important for you to try to help those who are survivors of brain injury and their families to start focusing on some of these funding issues as early as possible. Okay?
Great.
With that as a background, I want you to assume that a person has a family member who has suffered a traumatic brain injury. And we've learned that there's a range going from mild to severe, but let's plug it somewhere in the middle and say it's a moderate traumatic brain injury. There's been some period of time where the person was unconscious, and they have a cluster of symptoms that are classic to a brain injury. And I want you to assume that they do have a health insurance plan in place and that they're still in the critical care facility, but they're now medically stable and they've been transferred to a regular hospital floor. So life and death issues have now passed. We know that we have a person that's going to survive, and the family's asking, what next? And that's my question to you. What next?
Well, I think in today's insurance world, you can assume that even with a good health insurance policy, there's probably some caps to that policy. So, you know, I would suggest always to any family that they really look at and understand what the policy is and what the coverages are and what's available. Most people, I don't think, really have that understanding, and so there's a suggestion again that they outreach to someone that can help them with that.
And what type of people can they reach out to in that regard?
Well, I think there's whoever wrote the policy also getting the booklet to review the details. We also suggest attorneys as a resource to be able to really look at what those coverages are.
What's the role of the family at this particular stage while the person is still in the hospital? What should they be doing?
I think this is where families don't understand that they have a significant role. I mean, first of all, they're in shock that all of this has happened, but they play a very important role in really being the advocate and at times the case manager for this person in looking at what funding is available and what treatment and services are really going to be necessary for this individual.
You know, the world of medicine and hospitals is so organized. You have your critical care facilities, your regular hospitals, your rehab hospitals, and so on. Who should the family be consulting with at these early stages, at the acute facility and at the hospital, when the family member is still an inpatient? who should the other family members be talking to at that hospital about what's next and making arrangements and finding out what the options are?
Well, I think that families sometimes don't realize that they should be able to access that whole team, because each of those team members have a lot of information that's going to be necessary. But I would say if I had to be specific, absolutely the lead physician, whether it's the physiatrist or the neurologist that's really overseeing the case.
Let me go back
yeah.
for 1 second, because
Yes.
you used a word that I wanted to make sure I understood. Physiatrist, not psychiatrist?
Physiatrist.
And physiatry is the study of rehab medicine?
Physical medicine rehabilitation, yes.
Okay, and that's someone that's going to help coordinate the rehab treatment of the patient, as opposed to the neurosurgeon who may have fixed the problem initially, or the trauma surgeons?
Yes.
Okay, so first the physician who's the team leader with regard to rehab, right?
Yes.
Okay, and who next?
Well, and then I would suggest that they really get with either the social worker or the discharge planner, and sometimes they function as one. Different facilities use different terminology, but the person that's really looking at and taking the information from the team to help determine what those next steps are going to be.
Okay, and what kind of questions specifically should family members be addressing to the discharge planner?
Well, I think first and foremost is, what will this person need to be able to leave here? And you know, that can be everything from just the physical care of the person to all of the cognitive aspects, you know, safety, judgment, problem solving. Can the person be left alone? What kinds of therapies are necessary to continue to make progress after a brain injury?
I suppose that the neurosurgeon or the rehab physician turns to the family members one day and says, and by the way, I think we're going to be able to discharge in the next week or so. And the family member hasn't heard from anybody in the social services department or the discharge planning department. By the way, does that happen in your experience?
Absolutely, all the time.
Okay, then it is a good question, I think. What should a family do in those circumstances as soon as they learn that they're starting to think about discharge?
I think that that's where they have to get into the much more detailed questions of what kinds of supports will this person need, you know, what level is the person at, how impaired is their memory, what kind of judgment and decision-making capability do they have, so that it can then guide if there's going to be someone that's needed in the home, if home is even an option for that person as the next step.
Right. Now, I want to take a different tack for just a moment. Assume that it's a mild brain injury, that there's health insurance again, and the person has not gone through the route of going to a hospital, an emergency care facility, for an extended period of time, but a person's only in the hospital for a few weeks. We've had other sections where we've learned from Dr. Lenrow, a rehab doctor, a physiatrist, that there can be a mild brain injury which presents itself with a cluster of symptoms that can be very serious. But there's no discharge planners involved. At this point, the person is at home and has behaviors and acting out. Have you treated patients like this?
Yes.
Where does the family start there in terms of figuring out funding and resources? Where do they turn?
Well, I think, again, I would go back to looking at the specific policy, the health insurance policy, but also what was the cause of the brain injury. And again, you know, some families may want to turn to an attorney that can help to look at, is it just the health insurance that's an option, or are there other mechanisms that might also come into play to be a source of funding?
Mechanisms like workers' compensation insurance?
Correct.
Liability insurance for properties where incidents took place?
Yes.
Products liability claims? Automobile insurance?
Yeah.
And in the course of your treatment of patients here at ReMed over the years, has funding from those resources made a difference in the care that people have received?
Yes, because, typically what we see is that the job, someone with a brain injury, this isn't going to be fixed in a few weeks. I mean, this is a person that probably needs extended kinds of services and support. So all of those mechanisms may make a huge difference in their life down the line.
Right. And as you're aware, we have lists and resources here on traumaticbraininjury.com that people can consult as a starting point for finding various resources. And you're aware of that as well.
Well, and I will say, Stuart, that it's a great thing because that's been the problem for many families. They don't know where to turn. So being able to have a resource to go directly into and find some of this information is significant.
Thank you. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.